Near the back entrance stood several large refuse bins. One lid had been left slightly open. I glanced inside. My stomach tightened. There were dozens, no, hundreds, of empty medicine boxes, prescription bottles, disposable medical gloves, used syringes sealed inside bright yellow safety containers, powerful painkiller packets, medical dressing wrappers, more than I had ever seen outside a hospital. I stopped walking. What? Jabu lowered his voice. Keep walking. I obeyed. My heartbeat quickened. Nothing about this looked normal. Nothing. We reached the back patio. Jabu knocked softly. No answer. He knocked again. Several moments passed before I heard slow footsteps approaching from inside. The door opened. I almost didn't recognize the woman standing before me. It was Lerato, but not the Lerato the neighborhood knew. Not the woman who smiled every Sunday. Not the confident mother who drove the luxury SUV. This woman looked 20 years older. Her face had lost its healthy glow. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. Her lips were dry. Her skin appeared pale beneath the morning light. She gripped the doorframe tightly as though simply standing required enormous effort. When she noticed me, confusion crossed her face. "Thandi," her voice was barely above a whisper. "What brings you here?" I suddenly felt foolish. The words disappeared. She looked exhausted, not sleepy, exhausted in a way that reached the soul. Forgive me. I lowered my eyes. I've been hearing someone crying during the night. Silence, the kind that makes every second feel painfully long. Then to my complete surprise, tears instantly filled Lerato's eyes. She tried to smile. She failed. Her shoulders began trembling. "No," she whispered. No one was supposed to hear. Without warning, her knees buckled. I rushed forward just in time to catch her before she collapsed onto the concrete patio. She buried her face in both hands. Years of carefully hidden pain erupted all at once. She cried so violently that her whole body shook. Not polite tears, not quiet sniffles. These were the cries of someone who had carried unbearable suffering completely alone. I knelt beside her. "Lerato." She couldn't answer. For nearly 10 minutes she simply cried. I held her shoulders while Jabu quietly disappeared inside the house to give us privacy. Eventually she wiped her face with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry. There is nothing to apologize for. I've tried so hard." Her voice cracked. "So hard to stay strong." I gently helped her sit on the patio steps. The winter sun warmed our faces while birds chirped somewhere in the garden. It felt strangely peaceful. Yet the sadness around us was overwhelming. She stared at the flowers for several moments before speaking again. "Everyone thinks my life is perfect." I remained silent. "They see the house." She nodded toward the mansion. "They see the cars, the clothes, the smiles. They think God gave me everything." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "If only they knew." She slowly rolled up the sleeve of her loose jersey. My breath caught. Tiny bruises covered her arm. Fresh needle marks lined the inside of her elbow. Thin scars stretched toward her wrist. Evidence of countless injections, countless hospital visits, countless battles. "What happened?" I whispered. She looked toward the sky. 3 years ago. Her voice trembled. "I started feeling tired all the time. I thought it was stress. Then came the pain. My legs became weak. I couldn't sleep. I began collapsing without warning." She swallowed hard. The doctors kept running tests, blood tests, scans, more specialists. Months passed. No answers. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the step. Finally, they diagnosed me. She closed her eyes. It was a severe degenerative illness. My immune system had begun attacking my own body. There is no cure. Only treatment. Only management. Only pain. The words struck me like stones. I couldn't speak. She continued quietly. "Some days I feel almost normal. Other days," she smiled sadly, "it feels like my bones are breaking from the inside. The nights are the worst." I immediately remembered the cries. "When everyone goes to sleep," she whispered, "the pain becomes unbearable. I bite my pillow so my children won't hear me screaming. I lock my bedroom door. I turn on music. I cry until sunrise, a tear rolled down her cheek. I don't want my babies remembering their mother that way. I felt my own eyes filling with tears. For 3 years, while I had envied her life, she had been fighting to survive, and I still hadn't heard the worst of her story. She lowered her head and clasped her trembling hands together. I thought the diagnosis was the worst thing that could happen, she said quietly. I was wrong. I looked at her, afraid of what she was about to say. The illness destroyed more than my health. She let out a long, shaky breath. It destroyed our savings. She pointed toward the magnificent house behind us. You see this place and think we're rich. I nodded slowly. So does everyone else. But this house has become a prison. I frowned. What do you mean? She leaned back against the wall, wincing as another wave of pain passed through her body. My husband, Cabello, built a successful construction company years before I became sick. We lived comfortably. We traveled. We invested. We bought this house because we believed it would be where our grandchildren would one day visit. A faint smile appeared on her lips before quickly fading. Then I became ill. She swallowed hard. Within the first year, our medical insurance stopped covering several of the treatments I needed. The specialists became more expensive. The medication changed. The hospital visits became more frequent. The tests never seemed to end. I remembered the overflowing rubbish bins. Now they made sense. We sold our holiday cottage. She paused. Then we sold our family land in Limpopo. I stared at her. My father's land? She nodded. It had been in our family for generations. Her voice broke. I signed the papers myself. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. I cried harder that day than I did when I received my diagnosis. I didn't know what to say. She continued. People admired my jewelry. She gently touched the necklace around her neck. It's imitation. I blinked in surprise. The real pieces were sold 2 years ago. The expensive handbags? Most were gifts from years ago. The SUV? We've tried selling it 3 times. Why didn't you? We still owe the bank more than it's worth. For years I had looked at that vehicle with envy. Now all I saw was another burden. Lerato smiled sadly. Sometimes appearances become cages. I nodded without speaking. She continued. Do you know why I still dress well for church? I shook my head. Because if I stop, she stared into the distance. People will know, and if they know, she sighed deeply, they'll stop seeing me. They'll only see my illness. I'll become that sick woman. I'll become everyone's prayer request. Everyone will whisper. Everyone will pity me. She looked directly into my eyes. I don't want pity, Thandi. I just want to feel normal for 2 hours every Sunday. Those words pierced my heart. For years, I had mistaken her smile for pride. Now I understood. It had been courage. A gentle breeze rustled the trees above us. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy with understanding. Finally, I whispered the question that had been sitting in my heart. Why didn't you tell anyone? She smiled sadly. I told a few relatives. What happened? They meant well, but suddenly everyone treated me differently. They cried every time they visited. They stared at me. They spoke about me as though I was already gone. She looked toward the front of the house. My children noticed. They asked me one day. Her voice cracked. Mama, are you dying? She covered her face again. I promised myself I would never let them see fear again. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You've carried this alone. She nodded. Mostly. What about your husband? Cabello does everything he can. She smiled with genuine affection. He works almost every day. He travels constantly trying to win contracts. He sleeps in hotels more than he sleeps at home. Not because he wants to. Because every contract helps pay another hospital bill. She laughed softly through her tears. People think he's always away enjoying business. They don't realize he's fighting just as hard as I am. For the first time, I understood why I rarely saw him. I had assumed wealthy men were simply too busy enjoying life. Instead, he was trying desperately to save his wife's life. The realization filled me with shame. Lerato, I whispered, I'm so sorry. She looked confused. For what? I couldn't meet her eyes. For judging you. The words poured out before I could stop them. I envied you. I complained about you. I wondered why God blessed you more than us. I thought you had the perfect life. Fresh tears filled my eyes. I was wrong. Very wrong. Lerato gently took both of my hands. You weren't the only one. I looked up. She smiled weakly. Many evenings, I'd watch your family through the kitchen window. My family? She nodded. I'd see Sifo helping your children with homework. I'd hear laughter coming from your yard. I'd watch you all eating together outside around the fire. She smiled through her tears. I used to pray, Lord, if only my home could feel that peaceful. I stared at her in disbelief. You envied me? She nodded. You had something money couldn't buy. Peace. My eyes filled with tears. Our roof leaks. She smiled. A roof can be repaired. Our furniture is old. Furniture can be replaced. Our clothes are simple. She squeezed my hand. But every night, your family sleeps without wondering if tomorrow will be your last. Her words settled deeply into my heart. For years, I had measured blessings with my eyes. God had been measuring them with something far deeper. Just then, Lerato suddenly gripped her side. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. Her face tightened in agony. The color drained from her cheeks. I immediately stood. Lerato. She tried to answer but couldn't. Another wave of pain swept through her body. She doubled over, breathing heavily. Jabu came running from inside the house. Madam. He reached for a small emergency bag kept beside the kitchen door. Inside were medications, a blood pressure monitor, and a list of emergency contacts. He handed her a prescribed pain tablet with a glass of water. Her hands shook so badly that I had to help her hold the glass. For nearly 15 minutes we sat beside her in silence until the pain slowly began to ease. When she finally looked up, tears streamed down my face. She noticed, "You've been crying." I nodded. No one should have to suffer like this. She gave me a tired smile. I've become used to it. No, I said firmly. You should never have to get used to suffering alone. She looked at me, surprised. I took both of her hands into mine. From today, you are not alone anymore. If the pain comes tonight, I'll come. If it comes tomorrow, I'll come. If you need someone to sit beside you until sunrise, I'll come. She stared at me as fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. You would do that? I smiled through my own tears. Yes, because today I stopped seeing your house. I gently squeezed her hand, and finally started seeing you. She broke down once more, but this time her tears were different. They were no longer the tears of a woman carrying her burden alone. For the first time in 3 long years, someone from the other side of the street truly understood. Neither of us realized that this quiet promise on a winter afternoon would soon touch an entire church, transform a whole community, and teach us both that compassion grows where jealousy dies. That evening, I walked back across the street with a heart that felt heavier than it ever had before. The same mansion stood proudly behind me. The same black gate gleamed in the afternoon sun. The same silver SUV sat in the driveway. Nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. For 3 years, I had looked at that house and seen nothing but wealth. Now all I could see was a woman fighting for her life behind those beautiful walls. As I entered my yard, Sifo was repairing one of the loose sheets of corrugated iron on our roof. He looked up and immediately noticed my swollen eyes. What happened? I couldn't answer. Instead, I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. He held me quietly until my sobbing slowed. When I finally found my voice, I told him everything, from the overflowing medical waste to the bruises on Lerato's arms. The diagnosis. The crushing debt. The nights she spent crying into her pillow so her children would never hear. Sifo listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed deeply. I hoped it wasn't something that serious. I looked up in surprise. You knew? Not everything, he admitted, but I suspected they were carrying a heavy burden. How? A few months ago, I delivered construction materials to a hospital expansion project. I overheard 2 contractors talking about Cabello. They said he had been taking every job he could find because his wife was critically ill. He gently brushed a tear from my cheek. That's why I kept telling you not to judge what we couldn't see. I lowered my head. I was so wrong, Sifo. He smiled softly. The important thing is that your heart has changed. That night, long after our children had fallen asleep, I sat quietly by the window. Around midnight, the familiar light came on in the back room of Lerato's house. A few moments later, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Jabu. She's having a difficult night. Without hesitation, I put on my jersey, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and crossed the street. From that night on, it became a routine. Whenever the pain became unbearable, Jabu would send me a simple message. Sometimes it only said, "Please come." I never ignored it. Sometimes I sat beside Lerato's bed while she cried silently into her pillow. Sometimes I read psalms aloud until she drifted into a restless sleep. Sometimes we talked for hours about our childhoods, our marriages, and the dreams we once had before life took unexpected turns. Other nights, we said nothing at all. I simply held her hand, and somehow, that was enough. As the weeks passed, our friendship grew stronger. One evening, she laughed for the first time since I had met the real Lerato. "I used to think you didn't like me." I laughed too. "I didn't." She raised an eyebrow. "I noticed. I thought you were proud, and I thought you looked at me because you admired my garden." We both burst into laughter. When the laughter faded, we looked at each other with embarrassed smiles. "Isn't it strange?" she said. "We spent years making up stories about each other, and every one of them was wrong." I nodded. "Completely wrong. The greatest change happened inside me. I stopped complaining about my small house. Every morning when I woke up beside Sifo and the children, I thanked God for another ordinary day. The roof still leaked when it rained. Our furniture was still old. Business at my food stall still had slow days, but I had learned that peace is a blessing money cannot guarantee. Whenever customers at my stall began gossiping about wealthy families, I no longer joined them. Instead, I simply smiled and changed the subject, because I now understood something they didn't. You never know what someone is carrying behind a smile. Nearly 2 months later, something unexpected happened. Pastor Makona visited Lerato's home after Cabello quietly asked him to pray for her. The pastor was deeply moved by what he witnessed. He had known she wasn't well. He had never imagined the extent of her suffering. The following Sunday, the church was unusually quiet. After the worship team finished singing, Pastor Makona remained standing behind the pulpit. His voice was gentle. "My brothers and sisters, I want to speak about something very important today." The congregation became silent. We often celebrate people because of what we can see: their clothes, their houses, their cars, their success. He paused, but very few of us stopped to ask, "How is your heart? How are you really doing?" His eyes slowly swept across the congregation before resting on Lerato, who sat quietly beside Cabello. With tears already forming in his eyes, he continued, "Our sister has been fighting a severe illness for years." A shocked murmur spread throughout the sanctuary. Several women covered their mouths. Others stared at Lerato in disbelief. Pastor Makona continued, "She smiled while suffering. She encouraged others while living with unbearable pain. She gave generously while drowning in medical expenses." The church fell completely silent. Many people lowered their heads in shame. I noticed several women who had often whispered about Lerato wiping tears from their eyes. Then the pastor made an announcement no one expected. "Today's entire offering," he lifted the collection basket, "will go toward Sister Lerato's medical treatment." Before the ushers could even move, people began standing. One elderly widow walked to the front carrying a small envelope. A young man removed the little cash he had in his wallet. A businessman quietly wrote out a check. Teenagers emptied their pockets of coins, one by one, family after family. The baskets filled until there was hardly any room left. When my turn came, I looked down at the money in my hand. It was every rand I had earned from my food stall that week. It wasn't much. We needed it desperately, but I remembered the nights I had sat beside Lerato's bed. I remembered her cries. I remembered the courage hidden behind every smile. Without hesitation, I placed every note into the basket. As I returned to my seat, Sifo smiled proudly. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The church's kindness spread far beyond that single Sunday. The men's fellowship volunteered to repair parts of Lerato's house that had fallen into disrepair. Several women organized meal schedules so she wouldn't have to cook on difficult days. A retired nurse from the congregation offered to visit her every afternoon. Young people took turns driving her to specialist appointments. Whenever Cabello was away, even children became involved. They made handmade cards filled with colorful drawings and Bible verses that covered the walls of her bedroom. For the first time in years, Lerato no longer carried her burden alone. Months later, as spring brought fresh blossoms to the township, I stood outside sweeping my yard. Across the street, Lerato stepped outside. She looked thinner than before. She still moved slowly. The illness had not disappeared, but something about her had changed. She smiled, not the carefully practiced smile she used to wear. This one reached her eyes. It was the smile of someone who knew she was loved. She waved. I waved back. Then our children ran across the street to play together, laughing as though they had been friends forever. I looked around our little neighborhood. Nothing appeared different. The same dusty road, the same modest homes, the same people. Yet I knew something precious had changed. Not the street, not the houses, us. I finally understood a lesson that no amount of money could ever teach. A beautiful house is not proof of a beautiful life. A smile is not evidence of an easy journey. And the people we envy the most may be carrying burdens too heavy for words. That day, I whispered a prayer I wished I had prayed years earlier. Lord, forgive me for comparing my life to someone else's. Help me to see people with compassion instead of jealousy, and remind me that every person is fighting a battle I cannot see. As the afternoon sun dipped low over our little township, I realized that God had answered a prayer I never knew I needed. He hadn't made me wealthy. He hadn't given me a mansion. He had given me something infinitely more valuable. A heart that had finally learned to love instead of envy. And that changed everything. If you've watched up to this point, kindly subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos. Don't forget to like, share and comment your thoughts about the story. Until next time, bye.